Hi, this is Kevin Savitz. This is an interview with Mike Albaugh, who was an early Atari employee and the programmer behind the Atari 400-800 in-store dealer demo. This interview was conducted over Skype. He was in his home in San Jose, California, and I was in mine in Portland, Oregon. An edited version of this interview will appear in episode 6 of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast, at ataripodcast.com. This is the full unedited version of the interview, which was conducted on November 15th, 2013. You can contact me at savitz.com, Savetz. Here we go.
When you get to be 100, which I did in July, you get... Oh, that's only for people who use octals. So.
Right, yeah, I thought you don't look 100 in decimal.
But they say life begins at 0x40, so...
Right. Excellent. So you're in San Jose, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So just kind of give you what my plan is. This is going to be for... the podcast that I co-host, which is all about the Atari 8-bit computers. And so an edited version of our conversation will go in there, 10 or 15 minutes. And the full conversation that we do, minus any parts that you decide to go off the record, will be at archive.org. So the original, unedited, boring, long version will be there if someone really wants to hear it.
Yeah.
So that is the plan. So, how'd you get started at Atari?
Let's see. I was living in the North Bay and working at one of 3 tech companies up there, and the only one that regularly met payroll. So they didn't feel like they actually had to give me much of an advancement opportunity. So I was a draftsman, basically laying out PC boards, and I decided I needed to make a change. And having been down to Silicon Valley on a trip looking at a vendor, noticed that buildings had marquees outside advertising job openings. And I said, this is where I need to be living. So I started dropping resumes all over the place, but HP didn't want me, IBM didn't want me, Amdahl didn't want me, Rome didn't want me, and I'm like, damn. So I just gave up and went to visit a buddy who was working for this place nobody had ever heard of called Cyan Engineering up in Grass Valley. And at the time, he was working on something for this company called Atari, who I'd heard of, but not a lot, Mm-hmm. And I'm bitching about not having a job or not, having any prospects. And he says, I think Atari might be hiring some people. So, and the rest was, 25 years of history. So,
so you were hired in the coinop division?
Yeah, I was hired in coinop in 1976.
Okay.
So,
okay. I got to show you my shirt. My shirt is it's got all of the profiles of all the different Atari coin-op games.
Well, wait a minute. Do you have boxing?
I don't know if boxing's on here. The writing's really small. I know it has Battlezone, so.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, because boxing basically is to do the Atari football cabinet. They took a chainsaw to boxing and took off the hood that was over the playfield because there was a blacklight audience.
Right.
Phosphorescent ink. I was just messing with you. There's only one boxing that I know of in the world, and it's mine. So,
you have it there at home?
No, actually, a guy who took it away to repair it something like 3 years ago physically has it, but technically I own it. So,
possession is 9/10 of the law, however.
Yeah, 9 points of the law, actually, to be pedantic. But anyway, so
So you created this boxing game, which I understand was never released because the controls were too
fragile.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, more or less. And once the controls were robust enough, the game was too boring.
So. And then that was later turned into a game by Activision, the Activision
Yes,
Atari
yes.
2600.
That is basically Activision's game is a copy of mine, just as their Drag Race is a copy of my Drag Race. So I don't know if it's a unique distinction of having two of my games copied by Activision, but
Not licensed, but copied.
yeah.
Nice. What other arcade games did you do?
So let's see. Let's try to do it in order. I started Pool Shark, but didn't finish it, and I like to disown that. I did Drag Race, boxing, which was never produced. Let's only do the produced ones. Destroyer, Atari Football. I went into a long period where I was what I call a pickup programmer. I mostly went into working on other people's games rather than doing my own games. So games that I worked on, oh God, 25 years. No, and then the last couple of years there, I had a more, still not like lead game designer or anything, but a bigger role in Beathead, which was not produced but is at least interesting. Area 51 Max Force, Area 51 Site 4, and then became a formerly valued Atari employee.
Formerly valued.
Well, one of the corporate buzzwords is, stakeholders, including our valued Atari employees. So when someone left with a certain amount of push, they were called by us, not by a corporate, a formerly valued Atari employee.
Right. So you skimmed over arcade games that did not get produced. That you don't think it's interesting, but it is.
Ultratank. Ultratank. 300 copies made, and I ran into one at a show. It's like, dude, do you know there were only 300 of those?
Wow.
So, of course, he filed a bug report with me, and I've been grubbing through my floppies and found the sources. So I guess I'm going to have to fix the bug that one guy that I know in the world that owns an Ultratank complained about.
You have to burn new ROMs. It'll be a whole project.
I'm just going to send him an image. It's his job to burn new ROMs.
What language were those games written in?
Primarily assembly of whatever, like Drag Race was a 6800, Destroyer was a 6800, boxing, Ultratank, football were 6502. I'm trying to remember. I'm sure Captain Seahawk was also, well, I don't even know. I mean, we would typically do a game by taking a board from some other game and, if necessary, modding it. I mean, at least changing the graphics ROMs, but, maybe making some changes to the base board and start from there. And then we would lay out a new board for that, but things kind of sprouted from each other. One of my many someday projects is to do like a family tree of games and the parent that they were originally prototyped on, etc. But someday.
So talk about the games that weren't produced.
And
why weren't they produced? Give a couple examples, perhaps.
Well, primarily because they sucked. But Pool Shark was produced and shouldn't have been. That was based on the Tank 8 hardware, and that was my first job there that actually involved programming, as opposed to finding a paper tape reader we could buy a lot of and interface easily to the development systems, and building a real-time clock calendar and boot board for the PDP-11. Startup, remember? There was a time Atari was a startup and people did what they needed to do, like deliver games to arcades, for example. Dan Van and I destroyed a game because we didn't tie it down well when trying to deliver it. But so let's see. Captain Seahawk was marketing decided that the world really needed just a exact. My screen went to sleep or something.
You froze for a minute, but you're back now.
Yeah. There's something wrong with the video, and this is my wife's computer, and the video card every once in a while just goes to sleep and comes back. Did you lose the audio or just the video?
Just the video.
Okay, so fine. I can just keep talking and
Sure.
it'll come back eventually.
Yeah.
So anyway, they decided that Air Sea Battle game number, I forget what, 11 from the VCS was a good game, and they just wanted a coin-op version of it, straight port. And I'm like, are you guys crazy? And they said, no, that's what I want. And I said, fine, I'm the bus driver. I did a straight port, and it predictably earned like $25 in 2 weeks on location, which, you know, that's like 100 plays in 2 weeks. That is not a good result. So that at least died an early death. Ultratank, as I said, they made 300 of. They shouldn't have made that, but they did. Let's see. I started an adventure game, similar to what Warren Robinette later did on the VCS, but we wanted really good graphics because at the time that coin-op had two edges. One was more social gaming, and the other was, better graphics, sound, etc., because we did custom stuff per game. And that started out as being that we were going to use, remember, ROM was very expensive in those days. We had an idea that we might use a film strip. You're too young to remember those, but educational things.
I remember film strips.
Yeah, we were going to use a automatically, motor advanced film strip and a flying spot scanner to do really nice painted backdrops.
Cool.
And then overlay a few more expensive than we had ever done before motion objects on that for the things that would change in the game. And it soon became obvious that the film strip scanner thing wasn't going to work. So Dave Sherman came up with a hardware that wouldn't give us quite as good a video, but would give us, better than state of the art at the time. And I started working on that, but then they had a crisis for a game called Malibu.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of the start of when I stopped being a game designer and started being an all-around guy, a pickup guy. So Dan Pliskin and I quickly hacked together the math box for the 3D transforms for this game called Malibu. And then that math box was also used in Red Baron and in Tempest and Battlezone. So, and then I just kind of slipped into that service role from then on. Oh, I did Solar War, which was a let's use up the last couple hundred video pinball boards and see what happens. And they even laid out a custom board for it as well. But it was ready for production the same time as this game you may have heard of called Asteroids.
Little game,
So,
yeah.
yeah. And so they're like, we have this factory and we can either build Asteroids, for which there is phenomenal demand, or Solar War, for which there is some demand, but not like Asteroids. So in theory, or so I've heard, the couple hundred existing boards, and have you seen video pinball, coin-op video pinball?
Sure.
So it's the half-silvered mirror and the UV illuminate. So the kits, not a cabinet, but the electronics, the LED board, the little foam core, play field, etc., were sold to a distributor in Greece. At least that's what I was told. So at the time, pinball was illegal in Greece, but video games hadn't been outlawed yet. So he was thinking of making a killing on the Greek market. I have no idea what happened on that, but there were 5 what we call pre-prods, kind of a dry run of the production schedule made, and I have one of those. Pinball Museum in Alameda has one, and I do not know where the other 3 are. So that was a failure success. God, what else did I do? That adventure hardware, by the way, the second one, that later got repurposed for Tube Chase, what Owen Rubin called the game that wouldn't die. Tunnel Hunt, Tube Chase was licensed to Centauri. He just kept getting dragged back into that project. you know, things get a little strange. And then I did support stuff on like Marble Madness and Gauntlet and a chain of games that you've heard of. And then let's see. Oh, then Beathead, of course, which I think is an interesting game even to this day.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, you can find a MAME of it, but it's kind of not quite right. I've talked to you about my issues with getting involved with MAME.
Yeah.
I have two PCBs of the 5 or so that were made, and one of them for sure works, or at least did 5 or 6 years ago when I last plugged it in. I want to build a bar top cabinet for it someday. Again, I have the attention span of a gnat, so I have all these projects. Anyway, in between, there was a point when consumer and coinop stopped being separated by this Berlin Wall, which I had always penetrated because my buddy who had got me the job at Atari worked for consumer. So I would have lunch with those guys, and I kind of knew what was happening. But Al Alcorn preferred that it not be. But then he went off to Apple, and they got a bunch of, quote, adult supervision for consumer. So we did this kind of like exchange student thing. And a guy named Rick Maurer came down from consumer to work on Space Duel with Owen Rubin. And I went upstairs to, literally upstairs. Coinop was in the bottom floor, 1272 Borregas, and consumer engineering was in the top floor. And worked on, I got assigned, since they wanted a self-contained task that could be done in a reasonable amount of time and not throw a monkey wrench into their careful PERT charts, I got assigned the point of purchase demo, which I think was where we came in.
Right, which is frankly why I'm talking to you today, because of the demo. So, okay, how did the demo come to be? Who decided that it needed to exist? How did you end up with the job? Go.
Okay. So the idea of doing a point of purchase demo came out of consumer marketing. I'm not sure. And I think the first iteration of the demo, which I have a preliminary form of somewhere on disk, which is totally boring. It's picture sort of a PowerPoint done on an 800. And I don't, this died quickly. And then a woman called Georgia Marzalek, who had been a PR person, worked for National for a while, etc., kind of, I don't know whether she had spec'd the original one where, again, I was just kind of a bus driver and did what they said, and then everybody said, nope.
Okay, so you were given a spec to do this thing, and then it didn't come out.
And everybody, I mean, when I just did like the first couple screens, and they said, nah, this isn't working, so let's go back to the drawing board.
Right. And so, they gave it to you because they didn't...
Because it was a separable task.
Right.
You know.
Okay.
So, yeah, I wouldn't be like getting in the way of any like real consumer engineering development. And so I got to say also, because we had decided that a good development platform for it was Forth, and Steve Calfee and I had done port of DCUS Forth for the PDP-11 to the 6502, and Ed Log, there's a name you've probably heard, had done sort of Colleen bindings. Sorry, Colleen, you're familiar with the term. Okay, Colleen bindings for the graphics and calls into the Atari 800 OS. So we created, quote, Colleen Forth, ported the Forth to the Colleen, and Ed did his bindings. So I had some experience with this relatively rapid development platform for the Atari 800, and it seemed like a good fit for the job, so we went that way.
Because it was relatively high level and but yet powerful enough to do the demo you wanted to make?
Right. Well, and it's not so much the high level, but the sort of instant feedback. You realize that the alternative would have been, edit, assemble, put on a paper tape or something, etc. I mean, the official development for the 800 was kind of a messy task at the time. And Forth allowed me to sit at my own desk with my own 800 and not depend on any time-shared computer anywhere in the building. And because of the way Forth, I don't know if you've ever used Forth, if you've used Lisp or something like that, it's a very immediate language in the way that like BASIC is. But it's, so if you want to try something, you can like type a couple lines in and you can try it. And then you can, kind of keep that as a basis to do more on top of. So it's a nice incremental development environment. Anyway, so Georgia was the main one I talked to. There were a couple other people working on it, one of whom was the famous Neil that I've mentioned. I don't know his last name, and I don't remember the name of the other woman that was on the project. Mostly, I would talk to Georgia. And we kind of doped out what we'd like to see.
This is when you were re-speccing it?
Yeah.
For the first? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so
what was the goal? What did you want to see? What were you trying to do?
We wanted to actually, to some extent, the old advertising mantra, show, don't tell.
Yeah.
Right? The original one had been more tell. Right? And like I said, it was kind of like picture PowerPoint on an 800. Kind of like everybody treats the web as either, slow television or electric newspaper. People weren't really thinking in terms of what a computer with some video capability could do. So a couple things we knew we wanted to show was the sound capabilities and the video capability, including around that time. Well, it's not like today it'd be like a YouTube viral video, but there was this kid in, I think, Las Vegas that had come up with the rainbow logo thing. Now, his just kind of spun. And so I said, no, we can do better than that. So I synced it to the actual scan rate, and I took the grays out of the spectrum. So it was the rotating colors, and it was smoothly rotating colors. It just didn't flip. So like the first thing I show them is, they're saying, well, what kind of things can we show? I said, well, we can do this. And I'm like, woo! I know everybody's seen it now, but at the time it was pretty interesting. And it's funny because I was looking at the sources, and the section of code that does that is labeled Carla's logo and Bob's Atari. So the actual shape definition of the Atari logo was probably done by Carla Meninsky, and Bob was probably Bob Smith. I don't even remember, actually. But we only had one Carla, so that was...
And then the actual color cycling idea was taken from...
The idea that you could do color cycling in the logo came from some demo that some kid in Las Vegas did. The actually syncing it up so that it would move smoothly instead of just sort of like sparkling in colors.
Right.
That was me, and then it was kind of jarring to have the grayscale, the color zero.
Yes.
There, so I slightly modded it to do only the colored colors. And then, that was that. And then for the sound, you see, the old thing about great artists steal, right?
Right.
So Ed Rotberg had done a nice synthesizer for Pokey, the audio chip in the 800. And Dan Pliskin, this is another thing where the first thing you do, people say, oh, cool. Dan Pliskin had written this program called Disco Dirge for the bachelor party of a friend of his who was getting married, and had played it with the Rotberg synthesizer, which is really Rotberg sequencer for the Pokey synthesizer. But anyway, we called it the Rotberg synth. And so to demonstrate that, yes, we can do sound, we can do interesting sound, and we can do it simultaneously with stuff happening on the screen, I just threw in Disco Dirge. and they liked it, so that became the music.
Because it was just a file that you had around that someone had already made a song.
Basically, which was interesting because later Warner figured out that we really probably need to license this, so they had to contact Dan and license Disco Dirge for the demo.
So was he not an Atari employee? Or
well, he was, but it wasn't. He had not done that as work for hire. He had done it for his buddy's bachelor party.
Right.
So.
I read there's an article online about Disco Dirge from an old Antic magazine, and it said that the guy had two failings. One, he liked disco, and second, he had decided to get married.
Oh, you mean the actual friend?
Yeah, the friend.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah. Dan, I mean, in addition to being engineer, as I mentioned, Dan and I did the math box that ended up in Battlezone, Tempest, etc. So I mean, but he was also a musician. So, as many people working in tech and especially the video games industry have a tendency. I can't carry a note in a bucket, but a lot of people can.
All right, so you're making this demo in Forth. You're putting in screen after screen, the logo, the schoolhouse, the
book,
the Star Raiders, freaky looking Star Raiders screen.
Yeah.
And then what happened? Showed it to someone. They said, "Good, that was it." And
well, yeah. I mean, eventually they liked it, and I built the disc that booted directly into it, and I managed to talk them in. There was apparently some debate on Mahogany Row, but I managed to talk them into doing the self-cloning thing. I don't know if you're aware of that, but if you hold down the select button while the demo disc is loading, it will prompt you to remove that disc and stick a blank disc in, and hit carriage return or Y or something like that, and it will write a copy of itself on that blank disc.
I didn't know that.
And they're like, we're giving away our intellectual property. And I'm like, yes. And you're giving away essentially an ad to people who are going to show it to their friends, and their friends are going to want a copy. And I mean, we didn't have the term viral marketing at the time, but it's like, you want to do this. You want them to copy this. So that's how it shipped. And then they decided, well, we want one for the 400. And so
originally it was for the 800.
It was a self-booting disc for the 800.
Right. Okay.
And I'm looking at this is work, because part of the way Forth helps you is that, like I said, it's very interactive. You can change stuff, etc. But because of that, there's a certain amount of baggage in the image of the program. And so at that point, I had to convert the whole thing to a different Forth, which had been coming in. We'd started with clean Forth. I had to convert it to Fig Forth, because Fig Forth had this thing called meta-compiling, where they put only the stuff that was, you could put only the stuff that you needed to run in sort of one area of memory, and the stuff that you needed to develop in another area of memory. And then if you took a snapshot of the memory, it still ran and took less memory. So to sandwich the 400 demo in to the 16K cartridge, which I think I was the first user of, I had to port it to this somewhat different language and develop this whole meta-compiling thing along with Steve. Steve Calfee is like Mr. Forth Wizard. And I recently was messing around with that, and I had forgotten just how slow Fig Forth compiled on the 800. It's like, wow, how did I have the patience? But I did, apparently. And I don't know, that worked out. And it was one of those typical diving catch kind of things. So I finally get it the way everybody likes it. Okay, do the cartridge. So I burned a couple of 2764s, plugged them into this prototype 16K cartridge board, plugged it into a 400. Okay, by God, it works. I had my friend Barbara Lee, who is a graphics person and consumer, make a fake cartridge, the case with the label that says, Atari 800 demo. And I think there was actually a part number for it that we actually put on it. And this was like hand carried to CES, the day of. So, I mean, not unusual in that business. But it got me, it was a real learning experience. What can I say?
Yeah. So different versions of this demo. There's the disc version, and then there was the cart version. Was that basically it?
There was the disc version done in the original Colleen Forth. Then there was the disc version done in Fig Forth as a run-up to doing the ROM version that they actually sold to dealers as a cartridge. And of course then there was that first sort of pseudo PowerPoint. So there were kind of 4 versions, but they're all similar.
Right.
And I was just looking at it today, and the disc version wasn't all that much bigger than 16K, but the 400 demo has several screens that missing. I mean, so the 800 demo has screens that are not in the 400 demo, and I'm sorry, I don't know right offhand what those are. But I think that was a matter of they didn't want to oversell the 400.
Right.
So some of the stuff, some of the screens were just pulled to make the 400 demo.
I think I'm familiar. I'm more familiar with the 400 demo because that's what I've got here, and I was running it this morning because it's fun. So you alluded to this a minute ago, but about something we talked about in email, and I'd like you to tell the story. A version of the demo that's been floating around the internet. If you don't type it says what's your name, and if you don't type a name, it says Mark. But you told me that originally you didn't. The default name wasn't Mark; it was Neil. Can you tell me about that?
And so I mentioned the other 2 people who were working with Georgia. One of them's first name was Neil, and he was one of those kind of guys that goes deer in the headlights when faced with a computer. So when we were showing him the demo, and it says, what's your name? He just didn't do anything. Here's this little text box, essentially. You're supposed to type your name in. So because nobody wanted the thing to just freeze, I had a timeout, essentially, on that read. And because we knew this behavior of Neil's, I had the timeout essentially fill in Neil as the name. So if someone got that text box and didn't type anything, their name was Neil. So at some point, someone apparently took, the demo, and I'm assuming someone named Mark, or someone with a friend like Neil named Mark. I mean, you sort of run strings on the image, and by golly, there's a Neil there. It's 4 letters. I know a guy named Mark. I'm sure that what happened is they just patched Mark in over the Neil.
Right.
But wait, your demo cart.
My demo cart says Neil like it should.
Yeah.
But the internet version that you've seen floating around says Mark.
Yeah, the internet can be funny that way. Most of the Intercal manuals I've seen on the internet are mine too.
Intercal?
This is going to be edited out, I'm sure. Intercal. It's a joke language done by Lyons and Woods. And yes, you're right to suspect that the Woods is the Woods of Crowther and Woods. And it's this joke computer language that back in the day, things would get passed around by multiple photocopies or mimeographs or something like that. And I had gotten a copy of the manual for Intercal and decided it'd be great to do a version for the Atari 800. And about as far as that got was that my girlfriend at the time and I typed in the Intercal manual, and because there are some things you couldn't do on the Atari 800, there's an addendum to it about differences in the Atari version. So later when Usenet, I mean, it's still around, but it's mostly just poor man's BitTorrent for porn nowadays.
Cut my teeth on Usenet.
So anyway, when the subject of intercal would come up and people were like, what's intercal? I'd say, well, I could email you the manual. And I did. So somebody has HTMLized it, but all the versions I've found have that addendum about the Atari version. Huh. So there's like urban legend that there is an Atari version when in fact the only Atari version is the manual. Although every once in a while, as I say, I have the attention span of a gnat. Every once in a while, I go back and look at some of the preliminary notes that I'd made for an Atari. There may yet be an Atari intercal for the 800. You never know.
Never know. Huh. Are you familiar with? There's another joke language. I hope it's a joke language called brainfuck.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So.
And Bafunga and Unlambda. But I think intercal is probably the great granddaddy of all these languages. So
I had not heard of it before today. So I had a theory, and I think you're going to say I'm wrong, but that's okay. That your demo was kind of the opening volley, the shot across the bow that created the demo scene. But you just told me there was a kid in Las Vegas who was making demos. So, am I wrong?
Well, I don't know. I basically heard like word of mouth about this. I don't know whether that logo was part of a larger demo or was, I never actually saw it. I just heard, oh, this kid did this cool thing where he did an Atari logo, and then he messed with the color registers, cycling colors in it.
Yeah.
And so I quickly did that, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it looks like. No, that kind of sucks. And so but as far as the demo scene, the earliest demo would be if you could find Joe DeCure's demo for the capabilities of the Atari 800, where he you talk about a shot across the bow or something. As I remember it, and I don't necessarily remember it well because I saw it back before there was an Atari 800 when development was a certain amount of wire wrapped chip boards plugged into a Kromenko backplane, etc. But he sort of showed what things looked like on the existing consoles, and then that he could do as bad a video as each of the existing consoles on the 800, and then he could also do Atari 800 videos.
Right.
So he had things like shooting gallery ducks going by, and multicolored pictures where most of the other platforms could do only single colors, and stamp-based stuff. And I forget exactly, but certainly that's the first demo I saw, and it was at least a year, probably two, ahead of mine. So,
but yours is certainly one of the first demos of any computer that the public saw. I mean, of a computer really demonstrating itself and showing off what it could do.
Well, now wait a minute. Bouncing Ball on Whirlwind.
Okay.
Showing what interesting things you can do with a computer when you have attached a CRT display to it. And Space War on the PDP-1.
Okay.
Which rapidly became something that every DEC salesman
sure
would show off to people who were, and Steve Russell beat me by 10 years?
Okay.
So
then I stand corrected.
There's nothing new.
No.
Nothing new. I mean, I still find demoing computers interesting, but...
And people are still creating demos for the Atari 800.
Yeah, I mean, you can find them on YouTube and stuff.
Yeah, they're demo parties, mostly in Poland and Germany and things, and people just sit down and see what they can force the hardware to do.
I mean, you mentioned awesome. Germany. It's like, what do you expect from a place that has PowerPC Amigas, right?
Right, yeah.
So...
That's true.
Kind of cool.
Apropos of nothing, we got an email at the podcast You probably haven't heard the podcast. At the beginning of the podcast, the opening intro music is Disco Dirge, and
So you got to send a nickel to Dan.
yes, I'll send a nickel to Dan right now. Someone wrote in from the internet and said, "I love the podcast, but it's hazardous to listen while driving because hearing the Atari demo music makes me want to curl up in a ball and weep for my lost childhood."
So, yeah, in a similar vein, there was a guy, and I don't have his permission to give you his name, but anyway, there was a guy that went to work for Atari at one point, and we were working together, and we were talking about stuff we did as kids, and he had like messed around with various things, and I said, yeah, I didn't do a lot of 800 stuff, but I did do a couple of fourth ports to it, and I did the demo, the point of purchase demo, and he gets like this kind of angry look. It's like, that was you? And I'm like, yeah. He says, I worked in a computer store and I had to hear that damn music all day. He didn't kill me and eventually forgave me and we became good friends. But
yeah, I could see how that could get annoying. So you said in an interview so you volunteer at the Computer Museum, right?
Yeah.
In San Jose?
Yeah. Well, it's in Mountain View, actually.
Mountain View. What do you do?
It's all one piece, right?
Right.
Well, I'm a docent, which means dokeo, to lead, tukure, etc. I do tours. Mostly these days, I demonstrate Babbage's difference engine number 2, this large bronze Victorian-era calculator. And I'm hoping to, in the near future, also start demonstrating the IBM 1401 because they're almost done setting up an exhibit that includes a pair of restored 1401s. And you can't hear on the podcast, but I see your face, 1401. At the time, it was estimated that half the computers in the world were IBM 1401s.
Wow.
It was one of the first transistorized computers. It was one of the first small, cheap computers. Almost certainly the first small, cheap transistorized computer. And so just in the way that a lot of people, their first computer was an Atari 800 or a Commodore 64 or whatnot, for a certain age demographic like myself, their first computer was highly likely to be an IBM 1401 or an IBM 1620, depending on whether you were on the business side or the engineering side of your college, because high schools didn't have computers in those days.
Right.
So
awesome.
We get a lot of people in it's like, oh man, I used to use one of these.
All right, so at the Computer Museum, they interviewed. I read your interview that they did with you a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And
I'm wearing my prima donna T-shirt in that, right?
I didn't see I read a PDF. There was no photo.
Oh, okay.
That I saw. But you talked about the T-shirt, yeah, in the interview.
Yeah, I forgot to put it on for today, but then again, you're not presenting the video anyway, so what the hell?
Right. And so you talked about your contributions to the 400 and 800, which you said, technically my only contribution to the 400 800 was kibitzing with Joe DeCoeur and Jay Miner, and by then some of the other people that were working on them. And then, so you make it sound like, I mean, you didn't really work on the 400 800, but then the stuff that you mentioned that you did insist that they do or contribute is so huge and so important, these things. And I wanted to talk about them. You said, I made enough of a pain in the rear of myself to make sure the Atari 800 had upper and lowercase in its text modes.
Yeah.
I just think that's, I mean, it's just, so of course it needed to have that.
The Apple II had uppercase only unless you bought something like the Mountain Hardware board,
right,
which put the screen in bitmap mode and drew the characters in.
Right.
That's the plain 2. The later 2s did, in fact, have upper and lower case.
Sure.
But it was a typical, well, Apple II doesn't have lowercase and nobody cares. So.
Right. And then you said you goaded Joe and Jay into the display list interrupt, which you called kind of a neat feature of the 400-800. I just interviewed a few weeks ago Chris Crawford, and he called it the most important feature of that computer. What can you talk about why you thought DLI was important and how you what you did in there?
Basically, so at the time we were having lunch at a place called the Carousel, and I think it was called the Carousel. It's like sandwich shop near Atari, and we were talking about the display list, and I'm looking at the display list, essentially, not looking at, but we're talking about it, and it reminds me of an IBM channel. And one of the neat features of an IBM channel is the channel is essentially an I/O processor, and the neat thing about it is you can have like a whole sort of program. It's not exactly a program, but you have a whole program of I/O operations to do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it really helps for your processor to know that the I/O has gotten to a certain point. And so they had a feature in IBM channels, which I'm now admitting something that's going to cause IBM to sue whoever owns Atari now for patent infringement, except it was probably out of patent by the time, that you could interrupt saying, essentially, I've gotten this far. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking at, to a coinop guy, relatively limited color palette capabilities, and saying, and also the modes that you have. And I'm saying, it'd be kind of cool to know when you finish drawing a section of a screen and can like reuse stuff. And it was almost offhanded, but they had like some bits to spare in the display list opcode. So what the hell, we'll throw that in.
Interesting. And the other thing that it sounds like you were trying to get in those machines, but didn't. You said you wanted packet numbering on SIO, but you said it for that interview that's pretty esoteric, but it's not esoteric to us. So please talk about packet numbering on the SIO.
Okay. By that time, I had been doing some network stuff using a protocol, the Octopus protocol, which was developed at Lawrence Livermore, I think. I think both the Lawrence labs used it. Keep in mind, there was no TCP/IP at the time, et cetera. Everybody who hooked a computer to another computer did it kind of ad hoc.
Sure.
Right? But I'd read this paper in IEEE Transactions about this Octopus protocol and started playing with it. And one of the things they emphasize is you really need to number your packets, if only just like an A phase, B phase, like USB uses. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is this. If computer A sends a packet to computer B, and it wants to know when the packet's getting there. So almost all these protocols have some kind of acknowledgement, right? The problem comes up. Computer A says, yo, computer B, do this. Mm-hmm. Computer B does it and acknowledges it, but the acknowledgement is lost or garbled. Computer A times out and goes, yo, do this.
Right.
Right? Now.
But it's already been done the first time.
It's already been
done. Yeah.
Now, so if it's something like a disk sector write, these are what's called idempotent. That means you can do it a number of times and the result's the same. So that's fine.
Right.
But if it's something like the printer, it's not okay.
Right.
If you say, printer, print hello world, and the printer does it and acts it, but you missed the ack, you're going to go, printer, print hello world. And you get two hello worlds, not one. Mm-hmm. And this was exacerbated by the fact that there was a race condition in the original Atari OS that would cause it to, wouldn't you know it, occasionally garble received packets, like, ACK packets. Mm-hmm. It messed up the checksum. But so I had sort of argued for it on general principles, this SIO really is a network. You really need to worry about problems like the Lost Act problem, etc. And they're like, dude, it's like a foot of cable. What could go wrong? We don't need any of your esoteric CS shit.
Right.
And I couldn't actually come up, because the only thing SIO was really being used for at the time was the disk, really, that anyone had much of a use for. I couldn't come up with a good enough reason that they should do it. And then later, when they did the 825, apparently there was an issue with the precise timing of acknowledgments on the 825 and the race condition in the Atari OS that caused it to happen like a lot.
So finally you got to say, I told you so.
Yeah, but so what? I mean, I'd
Right.
rather it not have been, right?
Right.
But
SIO is kind of amazing. I mean, it came before. I've got a gadget on my Atari back here that SIO to SD card, and the Atari thinks this SD card is a bunch of big disk drives.
yeah,
And I can swap it into my Mac. It's amazing.
yeah. I bought I did a similar kludge that, again, I lost interest once I saw that it could work. Are you familiar with Arduinos?
Yes.
So Arduinos are often sold in combination with a mounted FTDI USB to serial chip.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you load the Arduinos that don't have native USB. So I had an Arduino, I had the serial chip, and I was like, this is essentially a UART, and it's got TTL level outputs. Like, what else do I know that is essentially a UART and has TTL level outputs? So since I also had several of those 13-pin connector shell things around, I kind of wired it up and did a sort of cheap-ass version of the Atari APE,
Mm-hmm.
or the APE that, just because I could. Yeah. I proved that I could and lost interest. And someday I will again. I mean, my ultimate goal is to have a sort of a triangular board that will have one SIO connector to connect to the 800, one SIO connector to connect to the rest of the chain, and a USB connector, so that the PC can be in one of several roles. And
it could be part of the daisy chain of SIO.
It could be part of the daisy chain, yeah. So, and I think you might be able to do that with some of the purchase things, but why buy when you can build, right?
Right. So my next question was going to be, do you still play with Ataris? But it sounds like you totally do.
Periodically. Right now I'm playing with a Kim 1 and a TRS-80 Model 100, and I have limited bench space. So right now the Ataris are in the boxes. But the amazing thing, when you consider the consumer electronics you use today, is that I still have one of the Sony 13-inch TVs that we used to use as monitors for the Atari 800s, and it still works. And it still works well. It's still, when I do haul the Atari 800s out, I hook them up to the Sony 13-inch TV, which I bought when it was surplused from Atari.
Because it was too old, right?
Yeah, well, they used to have the Sonys for the really good stuff, and I'm going to badmouth the brand and say they've gotten much better now. We also had the Samsungs, because your stuff had to be playable on a Samsung.
Yeah. Even on a Samsung?
Even on a Samsung. Now, I personally also own a Samsung flat panel TV now, which is fine. But back in 1980, 82, something like that, Samsung TVs were sort of the standard for you don't want to be playing games on.
So how did you become a formerly valued Atari employee?
Well, essentially, it was semi-voluntary. There was the Atari, or let's see, by that time, it was Midway Games West. I mean, I worked for Atari, Atari Games, Time Warner Interactive, Atari Games, Midway Games West, sitting at the same desk with the same phone number. So Williams had bought Atari Games and operated them as Atari Games for a while, and then renamed them Midway Games West. There was obviously a shakeout coming. At the time, I was working on a 6 Degree of Freedom light gun for a sort of successor to Max Force, but that project was having various, mainly political, but some technical difficulties. I could see the writing on the wall on that. And it was the only thing I was working on because I had wound down. We usually worked on at least 2 things at a time, but I'd wound down the thing before it. It was sort of my only job. And the father of one of my daughter's friends was on my butt to go to this startup, this absolutely fabulous startup. And so I went in and I told Dan Van, it's like I can see the clouds, right? If you want to lay me off, because I had a fair amount of seniority, et cetera, I'm okay with it, you know? So anyway, so they did, and I got a decent severance package out of it, after nearly 25 years at Atari, and went off to this startup and stayed 3 days.
Wow.
So I told my friends, well, it's not bad. My average years of employment at a company since college just went from 12 to 9, but it's not so bad.
What was the startup?
You've probably never heard of them. Their name was, and they had this really interesting idea that I was viewing as something that had been done experimentally in Boston of a way of delivering, well, like people use the web now. Your mouse clicks are nothing compared to the stuff coming down. And so the Boston experiment was really cool. You had a phone connection out to like an information service, but the downloads were carried over SCA, the Muzak channel of FM. So they were broadcast. So which at the time was much higher bandwidth than a modem. So what these guys were doing were they were overlaying digital information hidden in TV signals, regular NTSC TV signals, and
like in the overscan timing or something.
Some of it in VBI, some of it tucked into places the NTSC. It technically it was a plausible thing. And at the time I went there, they had supposedly gotten FCC approval for a field trial. And they'd done the field trial, and things had worked well, and they had prototype systems working, and all I needed to do was productize it. And I'm thinking, and the idea was was going to be a thing that was a USB device that hooked to your computer, included a hard drive, included their receiver. So what would happen, it was not like the Boston thing. It wasn't so interactive, but it was preemptive. So what would happen is that things that you might want to buy were being continuously, like videos and stuff like that, straight to video Disney videos and stuff like that, would go onto the hard drive. And then when you bought them via giving your credit card number over your dial-up modem, they'd be on the hard drive.
Wow.
Bam, you could watch them now. Anyway, a whole lot of things that I was told when I agreed to go to work there turned out not to be exactly true. So I said, I am not the guy who can do this. I'm going to get out of your way so you can try and find them. But a month later, they closed the doors.
Oh, man.
So
I have a couple more questions, but my laptop's out of battery, so I'm going to put you on hold for a minute and run upstairs and get the charger. All right. So of your time at Atari, what are you most proud of?
Proud?
Yeah.
So I thought you were going to ask me what I liked most was just the people there. It's like I love being in a place that just has such a variety of cool people and all doing exciting stuff. Much of it that I can't do, but also being able to to contribute to that because I did. Although as I said, mostly for at least 15 of those nearly 25 years, I was a behind the scenes guy, making the on-screen audio control go to 11 and handling coins and all that sort of stuff, doing diagnostics and bring up on old stuff. Well, I'm kind of proud that we did some pretty amazing technology and for not much money, because that's a biggie. We had one engineer that had on his wall something that said that it was a big $4, a dollar sign and a 4. And underneath the writing said, an engineer is someone who can do for a buck what any damn fool can do for 5. And so I like that. I like the fact that it was always different,
Yeah.
just... and I still, in fact, like tomorrow, I'm going to a housewarming for one of my coworkers who's moving into a new house, and expect to see several of. I mean, this is someone I worked with, certainly no later than the year 2000, I think, because that's when I took the package.
Yeah.
But I'm happy that not many of them hate me. That's a good thing to be proud of.
That's good. Sounds like there was some real camaraderie. I mean, you're still friends and talking to them. And
oh yeah. If you ever get Beathead running, that was really interesting because that was bringing kind of back to consumer. I and about 3 other Atarians and some people at a contract chip design house did a 32-bit RISC processor that was the actual processor used in Beathead. And the Beathead hardware was Lyle Raines and I riffing off each other and developing what I called Stella on steroids. It was like what you would expect if you updated the Stella idea of being nearly all software, and but with a 32-bit 20 megahertz possible processor and VRAM and stuff like that instead of a 6502. And it was pretty interesting, but it was the wrong game at the wrong time.
So if you could send a message to the remaining Atari 8-bit community, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Geez, I'm glad you guys are still having fun with it. I mean, I do too at times, but it's one of several things, and I'm hoping that gets them to do interesting stuff. I mean, I think the demo scene is some interesting stuff, but you don't have to limit yourself to that. I mean, I understand that making video games is not what I'd call fun anymore, where it's, you are one of 200 people contributing to a multi-tens of $million thing, and it's, there are still things you can do. 1 or 2 or 3 people together, riffing on an idea. And that was what I loved about that. And that's what people can still love about it. A lot of fun stuff. My daughter does games. She does mostly interactive fiction. So, there are still people doing fun games that don't take an army. And go do them.
Okay. We will.
All right.
I think that's about it. Thank you so much.
So are you going to send me like a copy of the when you've edited? Well,
yes.
Both just in case I've said something like the name of that company that I went to that shouldn't probably be in there. Very few people will recognize that name. But.
Sure, I can send you a version before it to proofread before it goes live.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Pronounce your last name for me so I don't do it wrong on the podcast.
Albaugh.
Albaugh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's anglicized Albach or Hill Creek.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.